continue, and he remains committed to ending the war in Afghanistan in keeping with the NATO objectives by 2014.
It continues, but does he think they will be prepared to handle their own security?
We'll leave the White House briefing at this point to go live now to the floor of the U.S. Senate. Lawmakers are set to take up a temporary federal spending bill which passed by the House. And now live Senate coverage here on C-SPAN 2.
For fiscal year 2013 and for other purposes.
By unanimous consent, the mandatory quorum call has been waived. The question is it the sense of the Senate that debate on the motion to proceed to HJ Resolution 117, a joint resolution making continuing appropriations for fiscal year 2013 and for other purposes, shall be brought to a close? The yeas and nays are mandatory under the rule. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka. Mr. Alexander. Ms. Ayotte. Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Baucus. Mr. Bekich. Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bingaman. Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Blunt. Mr. Bozeman. Mrs. Boxer. Mr. Brown of Massachusetts. Mr. Brown of Ohio. Mr. Burr. Ms. Cantwell. Mr. Cardin. Mr. Carper. Mr. Casey. Mr. Chambliss. Mr. Coates. Mr. Coburn. Mr. Cochran. Ms. Collins. Mr. Conrad. Mr. Coons. Mr. Corker. Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Crapo, Mr. Dement, Mr. Durbin, Mr. Enzi, Mrs. Feinstein, Mr. Franken, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mrs. Hagan, Mr. Harkin, Mr. Hatch, Mr. Heller, Mr. Hoven, Mrs. Hutchison, Mr. Inhofe, Mr. Inouye, Mr. Isaacson, Mr. Johans, Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin, Mr. Johnson of South Dakota, Mr. Carey, Mr. Kirk, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Cole, Mr. Kyle, Ms. Landrieu, Mr. Lautenberg, Mr. Leahy, Mr. Lee, Mr. Levin, Mr. Lieberman, Mr. Lugar, Mr. Manchin, Mr. McCain, Mrs. McCaskill, Mr. McConnell, Mr. Menendez, Mr. Merkley, Ms. Mikulski, Mr. Moran, Ms. Murkowski, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Nelson, Nebraska, Mr. Nelson of Florida, Mr. Paul, yes, I did, Mr. Portman, Mr. Pryor, Mr. Reed of Rhode Island, Mr. Reed of Nevada, Mr. Risch, Mr. Roberts, Mr. Rockefeller, Mr. Rubio, Mr. Sanders,
Yes.
Mr. Schumer, Mr. Sessions, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Shelby, Ms. Snow, Ms. Stabenow, Mr. Tester, Mr. Thune, Mr. Toomey, Mr. Udall, Colorado, Mr. Udall of New Mexico, Mr. Vitter, Mr. Warner, Mr. Webb, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden, Mr. Merkley. Senators voting in the affirmative: Akaka, Alexander, Beckich, Bennett, Bingaman, Blunt, Boxer, Burr, Cantwell, Cardin, Casey, Coates, Cochran, Coons, Cornyn, Durbin, Franken, Gillibrand, Hagan, Harkin, Heller, Hutchison, Isaacson, Johans, Johnson of Wisconsin, Carey, Klobuchar, Cole, Kyle, Landrieu, Lautenberg, Leahy, Levin, Lieberman, Lugar, McConnell, Menendez, Merkley, Mikulski, Murkowski, Murray, Nelson, Nebraska, Nelson, Florida, Pryor, Reed of Rhode Island, Sanders, Schumer, Shaheen, Stabenow, Tester, Udall of Colorado, Udall of New Mexico, Warner, Webb, Whitehouse, and Wicker. Mr. Blumenthal, aye. Mr. Brown in Massachusetts, aye. Mr. Hatch? Mr. Hatch, aye. Mr. Wyden? Mr. Wyden, aye. Mr. Inouye, aye. Senators voting in the negative: Barrasso, Coburn, Collins, Corker, Crapo, Dement, Enzi, Graham, Grassley, Lee, Manchin, Paul, Risch, Rubio, and Toomey. Mr. Johnson of South Dakota, aye. Mr. Thune, aye. Ms. Ayotte, aye. Mr. Sessions, no. Mr. Portman, aye. Mr. McCain, no. Mrs. McCaskill, aye. Mr. Reed of Nevada, aye. Mrs. Feinstein. Mrs. Feinstein, aye. Make sure you... Mr. Rockefeller, aye. Mr. Hoven, aye. Mr. Roberts, aye. Mr. Moran, no. Mr. Baucus, aye. Mr. Shelby, no. Mr. Bozeman, aye. Mr. Conrad? Mr. Conrad, aye. Ms. Snow, no. Mr. Bozeman, no. Mr. Chambliss? Mr. Chambliss, aye.
Brown. Mr. Brown of Ohio, aye. Mr. Carper, aye. Mr. Vitter, no.
On this vote, the yeas are 76, the nays are 22. 3/5 of the senators duly chosen and sworn having voted in the affirmative, the motion is agreed to. Senator from Montana.
President, 3 months ago, the United States Senate came together and passed a full 5-year farm bill. We did not kick the can down the road. We passed a bill working together. It provides the certainty America's farmers and ranchers need to continue supporting rural jobs and putting food on our tables. So there's absolutely no excuse for Congress to adjourn without sending this bill to the President's desk. to be signed into law. Still, because the House refuses to even bring this bill up for a vote, it looks like that is exactly what's going to happen. It's shameful. Passing the Senate was not easy. Everyone had to make a compromise. But the Farm Bill touches on the lives of millions of Americans in every single state. It is just too important not to act. The Senate's Farm Bill is true reform. We cut the deficit by more than $23 billion. That's over 10 years. We streamlined programs to make them more efficient. Went back to the drawing board on commodity programs and created a true safety net, one that works for America's farmers and also for the taxpayers, again, cutting the farm program by $23 billion. The House Agriculture Committee pushed out a bipartisan farm bill as well. I give the House Agriculture Committee a lot of credit. It's no secret there are differences, but even to begin working out those differences, the House needs to catch up, because despite having a bipartisan farm bill pass the House Ag Committee, House leadership is refusing to take it up. This isn't my first farm bill. I can tell you from personal experience that this action in the other body is unprecedented. House leadership has never blocked a farm bill that has been reported out of the House Ag Committee. On September 30th, our farm safety net programs expire. The farm program expires just 11 days from now. This is our last chance to give America's farmers and ranchers the certainty they deserve. This is also an opportunity to provide much-needed disaster assistance. Not long after we passed the Farm Bill in the Senate, a drought began to stretch across the United States. It's on the news virtually every night and has been for months. Wheat and cornfields drying up. Without enough forage, ranchers faced the decision to either sell their herds or purchase extra feed, cutting into their very thin margins. As of this week, more than 2,000 counties have been designated as drought disaster areas by the USDA. 36 of them are in Montana. That's well over half of our state is a disaster. There is a consensus in Congress and across the countryside that something must be done. And the Farm Bill is that something. Bipartisan vote here in the Senate by a large margin. And as I mentioned, bipartisan vote in the House Ag Committee. We have so many reasons to be grateful for the hard work of America's farmers and ranchers. They help sustain healthy rural economies. Because of the strength of America's agriculture, they put food on the table around the world. In 2011, agriculture exports reached $137 billion, a record surplus of more than $42 billion. And agriculture supports 16 million jobs nationwide. In Montana, 1 in 5 jobs is tied to agriculture. The Farm Bill is our jobs bill. Last week, many Montana farmers and ranchers came to town to talk about the Farm Bill. They each told me the same thing, and they told other senators and House members the same thing. We need a Farm Bill, and we need it now. 3 of those Montanans were Bing Van Bergen from Moccasin, Ryan McCormick from Kremlin, and Charlie Baumgartner from Great Falls. Bing, Ryan, and Charlie, like many Montana farmers, plan to go into the field next month to plant their winter wheat. They'll be doing so with this current Farm Bill expired. They'll be doing so with no certainty what the farm programs will be. That certainty which community bankers happen to rely on, advanced loans so farmers can plant. They do not want to see the farm program expire. They do not want short-term extensions. They need the certainty of a full 5-year Farm Bill. I urge the House to listen to what farmers and ranchers across the country are saying. The time to pass the Farm Bill is now. Holding up the Farm Bill with wide bipartisan support is playing politics with the livelihood of our hard-working rural constituents. Instead, let us do our job so farmers can do theirs. Let us answer their calls and pass a 5-year Farm Bill now. Mr. President, on another matter, I'd like to speak just a few minutes. I'd like to take a few moments to tell you about a dedicated public servant and his son. Russ Sullivan and Alhaji Amado Hassan, or AJ, as he is known by his family and friends. AJ died on July 28th this year. But in his short life, he inspired people through his exuberance for life, his courage, and his determination. Born in Sierra Leone, West Africa, in 1992, during the midst of a brutal civil war. Violence served as a backdrop to A.J.'s early childhood in Freetown, Sierra Leone. As a young boy, A.J., his mother, and two sisters were forced to flee their war-ravaged country to Guinea, where they found safety in a refuge camp. However, life in the refugee camp was difficult. There's no work for adults, no formal schools for children, and little hope for a better life. Unable to return to their homeland, their lives were put on hold for 8 years as refugees. But A.J. remained hopeful of a brighter future. That day came in 2002 when their father, who was living in the United States, was able to bring A.J. and his sisters to America. The children, 15-year-old Osmata, 11-year-old A.J., and 9-year-old Loretta, moved in with their father in Virginia. However, their father had struggled in America. And like many who don't have steady work, he did not have health insurance. So when A.J.'s father got a tooth infection, he ignored it. Left untreated, the infection spread throughout his entire body, and A.J.'s father died. An aunt tried to raise the 3 children on her own, but had difficulty making ends meet. The children were split up. A cousin took in Loretta. Osmata stayed with her aunt, and A.J. was taken in by a man named Russ Sullivan. Russ has long been serving as a foster parent in the community. He has monitored and mentored dozens of young men, becoming the legal guardian of some and helping hundreds see a different course in their life. Russ took in A.J. Then Russ took on additional responsibilities of becoming A.J.'s legal guardian. So who is this man, Russ Sullivan? Russ Sullivan is the staff director of the Senate Committee on Finance. He is known here in the Senate, as Senator Harry Reid has said, as a problem solver. Russ has developed a reputation for leadership, dedication, and respect for his colleagues. His staff admires him. His colleagues trust him and admire him, and I am honored to call him a friend. Nobody who has met and worked with Russ Sullivan has a different point of view. I've never heard anyone utter a criticism of Russ Sullivan, and no one ever will. He's that kind of man. The philosopher Thomas Carlyle once said, "The work an unknown good man has done is like a vein of water flowing hidden underground, secretly making the ground green." That's Russ. Name's not in lights. People don't know about him. He's working to solve problems, make the ground green. Under Russ's nurturing care, A.J. began to adjust to his new life in America. A.J. had boundless energy, loved to play soccer, fun to be around, great sense of humor, made friends easily, and loved to flirt with the girls. A.J. completed high school but had no intention of going to college. That was until Russ came into his life. In April 2011, A.J. told a newspaper reporter that his life changed after meeting Russ. Quote, this is A.J. "I was just going to do what everybody else was doing, drop out, get a job. But after I met Russ, everything changed about my mentality toward life. He started pushing me, getting me to think harder. He's a great man, and I thank God I met him." A.J. first enrolled at Salem International University, and after a year transferred to the University of West Virginia. He majored in sports management. I love being a mountaineer. Then tragedy struck. In a senseless act of violence, A.J. was assaulted in front of a local college hangout. He fell, hit his head hard, back, head snapped, and over the next few hours slipped into a coma. On Capitol Hill, we were in the middle of the deficit reduction negotiations. When Russ received the news about A.J., he rushed from Washington to West Virginia, where he stayed at A.J.'s side. Over the next month, Russ was traveling back and forth from West Virginia to Washington. This is during the super committee talks. Russ was juggling not only his career, but also A.J.'s medical treatment. He was also forecasting what we could do. He was fostering several other boys. This is not the only boy that Russ is the foster father for. And Russ kept working with the extended family and friends in the loop, kept working with them and telling them and keeping them informed about A.J.'s condition. I often hear the media reports about Capitol Hill being dysfunctional. Sides are polarized, compromised, dirty word. But when Chris Campbell, the Republican Senate Finance Staff Director, heard the news about A.J.'s injury, he enlisted his staff and the Republicans stepped up to help. They took Wednesdays. For the next couple of months, Russ's boys, 18 in total, when they're all home from college. Imagine, Russ Sullivan is a foster father for 18 different young men. For the next couple of months, Russ's boys knew that Wednesday night was pizza night coming from the pockets of the Republican Finance Committee staff. Wednesdays was that night. A.J. was moved from the West Virginia Hospital to Children's Hospital and Rehabilitation Center in Washington, D.C., where he remained for the next several months until after his death in July. We mourn for the loss of this young man who brought an incredible light to this world and to Russ's world and to all who met him. Brought such a light for such a short period of time. We are fortunate to have Russ working here on Capitol Hill. Russ epitomizes public service. He is honest. He is direct, upbeat, positive, looking for solutions, cutting through all the red tape. He always seeks to understand the arguments and keeps searching for the common ground, constantly, constantly. Sarah Reid keeps asking me, can Russ help here? What can Russ do about this? And trying to reach out to the other side to try to find agreement. He's always been someone I respect and trust. He's also someone I've come to admire. Months have passed since A.J.'s death, but his zest for life remains in the hearts of those closest to him, as Russ continues mentoring and helping others, changing lives one after another. Just last week, Russ witnessed a victory for another one of his boys. The boy had been wrongfully convicted of a crime and was facing deportation. But because of Russ's continued diligence and commitment, his innocence was proven and the conviction was overturned. That was just a few days ago. Harvard professor Rosabeth Moss Kanter once said, quote, "A vision is not just a picture of what could be. It is an appeal to our better selves, a call to become something more." Russ sees the vision of what could be and rolls up his sleeves to make it happen. I know I speak for all of us in the Senate Finance Committee and many of us in this body as a whole when I say, thank you, Russ. Thank you for making us want to find our better selves. Thank you for working to make the future better. And thank you for all that you do. You have the floor.
Senator from Utah.
Mr. President, I'm personally very grateful for the wonderful remarks of my colleague, the chairman of the Finance Committee, because I don't think any words could express how much Russ means to all of us. He's a wonderful man. He's a wonderful leader on the committee. He's honest. He's straightforward. He works with you. And frankly, we all think the world of him on our side as well. And I just want to compliment the distinguished chairman for his beautiful remarks about a tremendous person and the foster children that he has worked with. Russ is the epitome of greatness on the Senate Finance Committee and is a staff member of the United States Senate. So I want to just personally pay tribute to him and express my sorrow over the loss of his son, A.J., and express my love and affection for him. A good man, helping a good chairman. We work together very closely, and I just have a lot of regard for what the chairman just said, and a lot of regard for Russ. And wish him the best, and I hope that the good Lord will comfort him and comfort his soul during this very trying time.
Thank you, Senator, very much.
Thank you.
I know Russ
Thank you,
deeply
Mr.
appreciates that,
Chairman.
and we all do. Thank you.
Mr. President, I would ask my remarks to be placed in the appropriate place in the record
Without objection.
that I'm about to give. Mr. President, on July 12, 2012, the Obama administration's Department of Health and Human Services issued an information memorandum informing states that for the first time in the 16-year history of the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program, HHS would permit them to waive welfare work requirements. This action undermines a robust work-first approach that was one of the key features of the 1996 Welfare Reform Act. If allowed to stand, this action could result in activities such as journaling, bed rest, and smoking cessation classes being counted as work for the purposes of meeting federal welfare work performance standards. Now, this change in policy presents a serious substantive question. Should taxpayer dollars go to welfare recipients who are not working but are instead journaling or working to quit smoking? But it presents serious institutional questions as well, because the action by the Obama administration was, quite simply, a unilateral power grab that usurps the constitutional power of the legislative branch. And every member of this body ought to be concerned about it. That is no small thing. Our Constitution, for good reason, locates the lawmaking power in the Congress, and that is because our founding fathers understood that in a republic of laws, the lawmakers must represent the people directly. The people must have a close hold on the representatives who create the laws under which we live. If changes are going to be made in the welfare work requirement, it should be up to the Congress to make them. Faceless bureaucrats at HHS should not be the ones making changes to the welfare work requirements. Yet that is exactly what happened here. Unelected bureaucrats at HHS are attempting to change the law, a law passed by the United States Senate and the whole Congress. If left unchecked, welfare policy is being substantially changed by the Obama administration in a way that never would have been acceptable to the people's elected representatives in Congress. No administration should be permitted to disregard the laws that Congress passed and simply make up their own rules. For 16 years, no president, Health and Human Services Secretary, or governor, regardless of political party, believed that welfare work requirements could be waived. If the Obama administration believes that welfare work requirements should be changed, they should submit a legislative proposal to Congress. In the 3.5 years before the July 12th information memorandum, the Obama administration never offered a legislative proposal to change the welfare work requirements. The unprecedented nature of the Obama administration's their power grab is supported by the nonpartisan Government Accountability Office. On September 4th, 2012, the GAO responded to an inquiry from me and Ways and Means Chairman Dave Camp. Let me put that another way, from Ways and Means Chairman Dave Camp and me. They determined that the July 12th information memorandum was a rule that should have been submitted to Congress. GAO further found that as a rule, the information memorandum was subject to the Congressional Review Act. The Congressional Review Act provides Congress with an opportunity to review and, where appropriate, disapprove rules issued by the executive branch. When more and more of the rules that govern the American people are being made by anonymous and unelected bureaucrats with no responsibility to reflect the priorities of the American people, the Congressional Review Act is a critical device, and one we should always uphold. It allows the people's representatives in Congress to stand up and reject a rule emanating from the federal bureaucracy. The Committee on Ways and Means favorably reported a resolution of disapproval last week. The full House of Representatives will consider the resolution of disapproval this week. I've introduced S.J. Res. 50, a resolution of disapproval, here in the Senate. I am pleased that my legislation is co-sponsored by 21 of my colleagues. The Congressional Review Act also provides for fast-track consideration of a resolution of disapproval when a senator has secured at least 30 signatures on a discharge petition. That means no filibuster. I'm pleased to report that I have well over 30 signatures on a discharge petition. Unfortunately, this expedited process does not kick in until later this month. The Senate will be voting on my resolution. There's no question about that. The only question is when, in my view, we should, is when. In my view, we should take this matter up now. It is a critical issue for the American people, and it is a critical issue for this institution. As the people's representatives, it is a dereliction of duty to stand by while unelected officials attempt to change the law unilaterally without the constitutionally prescribed input of the people's representatives in Congress. For that reason, in a few moments, I will propound a unanimous consent request for debate, followed by a vote on proceeding to the resolution of disapproval. Madam President, it's a simple request. A vote on the resolution of disapproval is inevitable. The only question is whether or not the majority will allow a vote in a timely manner. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Finance be discharged from further consideration of S.J. Res. 50, a joint resolution disapproving a rule submitted by HHS regarding welfare waivers, that there be 2 hours of debate on the motion to proceed equally divided and controlled between the 2 leaders or their designees. The Senate then proceed to a vote on the adoption of the motion to proceed.
Is there objection?
Madam President, I reserve the right to object.
Senator from Maryland.
Madam President, under my reservation, let me first thank my colleague for Utah for bringing this matter before us. But like him, I was in the Congress in the late 90s when we passed the TANF law. And I remember being part of welfare reform. Prior to that time, we had what was known as AFDC, Aid for Dependent Children, which was an entitlement program that offered the states the opportunity to move forward without risk because they were guaranteed a certain amount of money for every child that was eligible, for every family that was eligible for welfare funds. We changed that to provide for temporary assistance for needy families, TANF. And I remember very clearly working with the states and working with my distinguished colleague. And what we told the states is that you're going to get a block grant. That means that you are going to be, bottom line, responsible for the program, that there will no longer be a guarantee on the number of families that are enrolled in welfare as to the dollars you're going to receive. And we promised you 2 things. We told the states we were going to give them the tools they need to get the job done. We provide the funds so they could provide for job training so that the people on welfare would have adequate skills in order to get jobs. We promised them child care so that children could be taken care of while they're in the workforce. And we provided the tools. But we also said we would provide the states the flexibility to get the job done. We provided accountability, and accountability was participation rates, which could be satisfied by different ways, but said the states have the flexibility to get the job done. A model of federalism, that we would let the states experiment and figure out what was the best way to accomplish the results, getting people off of cash assistance, getting them into the workplace. Now, let me just point out to my colleagues, the waiver authority has been in the law for a long time, Section 1115. We've had our disagreements with all administrations on the use of the waiver authority. My colleague refers to the GAO's report, which dealt with 5 waivers that were requested from 2000 to 2009. Those state waivers sought relief from the specific requirements. It didn't bring forward an innovative new approach to try to use state experimentation to get the best results. It's interesting that in 2008, under the Bush administration, Health and Human Services documented that the waiver authority indeed existed as related to the participation rates and the way in which it could be satisfied. Secretary Sebelius has made it clear the waiver will only be used for a credible plan to increase employment by 20%. So she's looking at using the waivers to increase participation rates, to increase the number of people who are actually employed. If there's not progress within a year, the state runs the risk of losing the waiver. It's focused on improving employment outcomes for participants. Now, Madam President, I must tell you, I'm extremely disappointed about the partisan nature of this discussion. I say that because I think we've all seen the ads that have been put on network by Governor Romney that accuses the Obama administration of eliminating the work requirement on TANF, on welfare, when the facts are that the use of this waiver authority has been to strengthen the work participation rates, to strengthen the work participation rates. These ads have been condemned by major news sources on both the left and right. They understand this. So you would think that once Governor Romney understood that his ad was misleading and wrong, he would take it off the air. But instead, he's actually increased the usage of this ad, which I find to be outrageous. Maybe it is consistent with Governor Romney's recent disclosure of his concern for half of America, saying it's not his problem. My job and our job is to consider the needs of all of our constituents. TANF is a program that I think represents a model in federalism. It allows us to learn from the states so we can take their best models and use it for national policy. That's the reason for federalism, and that was the reason we went to the TANF reform. What the waiver authority is being used for is to give us that experimentation. We've heard from more and more states that Congress mandates too much. I hear from our Republican colleagues all the time that we have too many mandates. Well, some states have a better way of doing it. Rather than spend their money dealing with the mandates, they said, look, we'll accomplish the bottom line. We'll get more people working. We'll get better results. We'll get better people trained. We will not only get people employed, but they'll have the skills to go up the employment ladder, to really succeed and have good-paying jobs in their lifetime. Let us do what's right, and then you can learn from us rather than having to listen to the specific mandates that some of my colleagues would like to see in stone here from Washington. So, Madam President, this was a commitment we made to the states in the 90s. The waiver authority was existing law. The Secretary of Health and Human Services, Secretary Sebelius, is only using it for innovative approaches that increase the work responsibilities of the state, not diminish it. That's been well documented, and for all those reasons, I do object.
Madam President.
The objection is heard. Senator from Utah.
Madam President, I appreciate my colleague's remarks, much of which I agree with. That still doesn't negate the fact that the administration has acted unilaterally as the executive branch to usurp powers of the legislative branch. That's the issue here. It's a very, very important issue. Now, it's the responsibility of the Congress, not the President, to give the states flexibility with regard to the work requirement. And the Congress is pretty explicit on that. GAO has reported today that even those states had requested or inquired about waivers, no administration, not the Clinton administration, not the Bush administration, not the Obama administration, believed they had waiver authority. That is until July 12th when HHS did this. And I think they know that they're wrong on this. Well, the latest GAO report details how whenever states requested TANF waivers in the past, HHS responded that no such authority exists. Between 2000 and 2009, during the Clinton, Bush, and even Obama administrations, HHS has consistently told states they have no waiver authority. Specifically, GAO finds that at least 5 states asked HHS about TANF waivers during that period. In 2 of these cases, GAO said HHS official response said that they, quote, did not have authority to provide waivers, unquote. In the 3 other cases, when states asked informally, GAO reports that HHS responded saying, quote, the requested waiver authority was not available, unquote. Separately, HHS in 2005 and 2007 published 2, quote, program instructions, unquote, about flexibilities in TANF, both indicating no waiver authority existed. In these instructions, HHS stated that, quote, we have no authority under current law to waive any of the TANF statutory requirements, unquote, and, quote, we have no authority to waive any of the provisions of the Act, unquote. Only the Obama administration has claimed the, quote, authority, unquote, circumventing Congress. Now, look, this isn't just a political issue, as the distinguished senator from Maryland, one of my dear friends here. We both graduated from the University of Pittsburgh Law School, School of Law. I have a great admiration for him and great feelings towards him. But only the Obama administration has claimed this, quote, authority, unquote, circumventing Congress. The latest GAO report highlights that only the Obama administration has claimed the authority to waive welfare work requirements. Further, GAO notes that this action by current HHS officials is in response to the President's February 2011 memorandum, which, according to subsequent administration guidance, solicited, quote, input on significant statutory barriers that could be addressed through waivers, unquote. Especially when viewed in the context of the President's, quote, we can't wait, unquote, agenda, it is clear that this HHS proposal is part of an organized administration effort to circumvent Congress and its legislative authority, and we've seen that time after time with an abusive use of executive orders. Now, look, TANF has worked amazingly well because of the work requirements in TANF. There's a good reason why no other administration has tried to pull this type of a stunt. And whether you agree with the administration or not, it seems to me we ought to first uphold the rights and powers of the legislative branch of government that cannot be circumvented just because the President wants to do something on his own. Now, that's what's involved here, and I think we ought to all stand up, Democrats and Republicans, and say, look, you're not going to be able to do this. If you want to do it, then you're going to have to do it through statutory changes, or at least ask Congress for permission. And that's the purpose of asking for this vote, which has been objected to. We'll have to do it, I guess, during the lame duck session. But the purpose is to stand up for the rights of the Congress of the United States, and especially the rights of the United States Senate, that are being ignored here. There's a lot more I can say about it, but I think that basically covers it, and I appreciate my colleague and his feelings on this matter. There's no question that, but to put it in the category that this is Mitt Romney trying something, Mitt Romney's had basically nothing to do with it other than he agrees with what we've done. And he said that after we did it. He did not come to me and ask me to do it. The fact of the matter is that we're standing up for the legislative prerogatives that really we ought to stand up for, and the GAO said should be stood up for because they declared it a rule. The GAO is not in the pockets of Republicans or Democrats. It's there to try and determine these type of issues that are extremely important legal issues, extremely important legislative issues, extremely important separation of powers issues. So that's what we're doing here, and it really shouldn't even be a political issue. We ought to just vote and let it go at that. But it's been objected to. I'm willing to wait until the appropriate time to have the vote.
Madam President.
Senator from Maryland.
Thank you, Madam President. I very much appreciate my friend, Senator Hatchie. We are good friends, and I very much appreciate the point he makes. I need to at least correct 2 points. One, I graduated from the University of Pittsburgh undergraduate school, not law school. I'm a graduate of University of Maryland Law School, and I want to make sure my friends in Maryland know that it was a law school.
Well, if the senator would yield, I certainly retract my statement on that, but I feel badly that you didn't graduate from the University of Pittsburgh, as did I.
Well, I was afraid